Hey, fellow geographers, welcome to Quarantine Geography Day 2. I'm here with my co-host, Adeline. I got my quarantine mustache, so we're ready to go. Today on our Google Earth tour, we're going to explore one of the 5 themes of geography, human-environment interaction, and we're going to continue to check out last time's theme, the relationship between land and water. Maybe we'll make some new friends along the way. So, we're going to look at 4 vocabulary terms again today. A gulf, a bay, a harbor, and a cove. Now you might be thinking, Mr. Fuse, I thought those were all the same. Well, I'm here to tell you, you're going to be the coolest person at your next geography party because we're going to learn the small differences between them. Your job is just to add those 4 vocabulary terms and definitions to a Quizlet when you see them pop up in the right-hand corner. So, let's get started with our first term, a gulf. Now, a gulf is a large body of water almost surrounded by land with a narrow mouth. And that's a very similar definition to all of our terms today. But one key difference is size. A gulf is usually much larger than our other terms, such as the Gulf of Mexico, which is the largest gulf in the world. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. If you remember last time, the Bay of Bengal is actually a little bit larger than the Gulf, and that's the largest bay in the world. But usually, a gulf is much larger than a bay or a harbor or a cove. Now, if we zoom into our gulf, we can see our human-environment interaction theme. And that, in the Gulf of Mexico, is going to be deep water oil fields. See that, Adeline? Yeah, Adeline is impressed. Now, humans use their environment for things like digging oil, sometimes negatively. And we've seen in the Gulf of Mexico there have been oil spills. And so human-environment interaction is not always positive. In this case, the company BP has this deep water oil field called the Thunder Horse. And I told you we'd make some friends along the way. Remember that guy? Okay, so let's go to our next vocabulary term, a bay. Now, like I said, a bay is usually smaller than a gulf and usually not quite as deep. A gulf, like the Gulf of Mexico, is very deep. Yeah, Adeline? Oh, do you see that? Yeah, so a bay is a large body of water that extends into a shoreline, usually a little bit smaller than a gulf, sometimes a little bit wider in its mouth opening rather than deeper, like a gulf. And a good example is the Hudson Bay up in Canada. And if we zoom in, the human-environment interaction theme here is really interesting. We have the relationship between humans and wildlife. So in this case, polar bears are actually very common along the coast of the Hudson Bay. There are about 25,000 polar bears in the world, and about 15,000 of them live in Canada. And so when a polar bear gets too close to a human, we got to put them in polar bear jail, sometimes called a polar bear holding facility. So this is the polar bear jail here in Churchill, Canada, and it's right by the Hudson Bay. Our next vocabulary term is a harbor, and we're going to go all the way down to Australia. Good night, mate. Australia has a very famous harbor, and it's actually part of several harbors inside of Port Jackson. Now, yeah, that's a bridge. A harbor and a port share similar functions. They're usually much smaller than a gulf or a bay, and they're often for docking ships. It's where ships can anchor safely. And so Port Jackson has several harbors, the most famous of which is the Sydney Harbor. Here's the Sydney Harbor Bridge, spelled O-U-R, the British way. But in the Sydney Harbor is a very famous example of human-environment interaction, the Sydney Opera House. And human-environment interaction a lot of times has to do with industry. And this is a very common industry, whether it's entertainment or opera music or just theater shows. The Sydney Opera House is one of the most famous in the world. And we can actually go inside of the Sydney Opera House. You want to go inside there, Adeline? All right, let's check it out. The Sydney Opera House was built way back in the 1970s, but still very well upkept, as you're going to see here. Whoa, let's go inside. Ooh. We went outside. Let's see if we can go inside. Let's go in. What do you think we're going to see? Ooh, look at that. Looks like we're backstage. That's where all the people sit. Would you like to go sit there? Mm-hmm. Pretty cool. Okay, our final vocabulary term is a cove, and we're going to go even further away from the United States, down to Antarctica. If you want to be alone, go to Antarctica, because it's mostly just penguins that live there. Be a good place to be during quarantine. Antarctica is not home to a lot of permanent populations, but there are scientist facilities that are there, usually not all year round, but for parts of the year. But one common place that you can go is a cove, like Evans Cove. You see the cove? Okay, so there's a small, narrow mouth. It's very small, a lot of times used for docking ships, similar to a harbor. But in the case of Evans Cove, we actually have an interesting human-environment interaction. Exploration, humans exploring their environments. There's not very many places in the world you can go anymore to explore, but Antarctica is one of them, and so you can go on what's called the Ortelius. It's an exploration cruise. And again, I told you we'd make some friends. Hey, friends. And you can go and explore places like Evans Cove in Antarctica. Okay, so that's our vocabulary terms for the day. Go ahead and add those 4 terms: a cove, a harbor, a gulf, and a bay to your Quizlet. You should be up to 8 total terms now. And your assignment today is to find 4 examples of human industries that have to do with water. So we looked at deep water oil drilling, we looked at the relationship with polar bears and exploration, and we looked at the Sydney Opera House. Find an example, 4 examples in fact, of humans dealing with water to form an industry. Sound good? Okay, we'll see you next time. Stay safe. Have a great day.